So now we'll try to, in a way, put a bit into motion all the elements that we have presented to you in the two first sessions. You will see there are also contribution from DG RTD and DG AGRI. So they will also highlight now more precisely, you see, the areas where we think we can have synergies with them, complementarities, additionality. I have to be honest with you, it's obviously, even for us, an area where we need to improve. That's why also we are doing it today, because we think we need to start somewhere. But we really encourage you to discuss more with your counterparts and to try to identify such a synergies. So let us move to the next slide. Yeah, so we will start with first the IPA CBC program, because you know there are some, just to, for your information. I don't know how much you are aware of them. This is obviously essentially relevant, let's say, for the Interreg IPA CBC program, but I think also for AGRI. That's also, I think, important information you will see. Then a few words about the two strategies and how those strategies are also linked to the investment plan for the Western Balkans. We have done a kind of mapping with the Slovenian presidency of the EUSAIR. You will see that. Then, as we already advocated, we really lobby for reinforced working cooperation with other EU programs. And today we have DG AGRI, DG RTD, maybe DG NEAR might also see if they want to say a few words. Then we will move to the border obstacles, because that's, you know, that's something that on which our colleagues from the internal Interreg programs are putting already a lot of, let's say, efforts, but not really Interreg IPA programs. Obviously, we don't have the single market, clearly, but nonetheless, there are border obstacles that we can probably reduce, and you will see we have ideas. We have also started some analysis, some studies, and we hope that can also support your work and your programming choices. Then a few words about ISO 2, why we think ISO 2 remains something important. And then we will finish with two examples where we see where you can have either a better thematic focus or a better territorial focus. Okay, so first, more coherence with IPA CBC program. So yes, let us move even further. Thank you. So you know probably very well those maps. The one on the left-hand side is the map of the internal, we call them internal Interreg programs, CBC programs. And on the right-hand side is the map of the Interreg IPA CBC programs. My remark here that I would like to convey to you is that first we wanted to the continuity, let's say, of the program area. So in general, the changes compared to the current period are extremely limited. And the second thing, in general, we accepted all the proposals you made. This has been reflected in the answers that we have made recently to you, at least to the concerned member states. But what you can also notice is that, especially in the IPA countries, the program area is much broader than just the border regions. Probably not completely true for Serbia, where we are still on the border region, or Bulgaria, Turkey, but you see, otherwise, in general, we are actually much more, let's say, we're covering a bigger area than the internal Interreg programs, which also gives you, let's say, some opportunities that the internal Interreg programs don't have, especially, and here we have in mind this enlargement agenda. We are really convinced that you can actually help IPA countries to practice shared management, and this is really an experience which can be extremely valuable in the, let's say, enlargement experience. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we move first to the IPA CBC programs. So here are the IPA CBC programs. Just to tell you that in general, the program area will not change. There are a few exceptions, but again, the changes are really limited. in general, there are extensions. So you have Montenegro, Albania, where they will include the municipality of Kolašin, Montenegro, Kosovo, where they add 3 small municipalities on Montenegrin side, and Serbia, North Macedonia, where they will add 4 municipalities of the city of Skopje. So in general, the program areas are not will not change significantly. There are obviously nonetheless overlaps with your programs, and that's something to be considered. But we will now move to the let's say thematic concentration, because that's also important. So you see in that, you know, probably those programs do not have an enormous budget. The biggest one is the Serbia-Bosnia program. The second one is Montenegro-Albania. We are talking about, you see, maximum 16 million euros over a period of 7 years. So you see, it's not enormous. In terms of priorities, there is one priority which is selected by really almost all of them, which is tourism and cultural and natural heritage. Again, this is really in the continuity of what they're doing already now. There are also 2 priorities which are almost not selected by them. The first one is youth education and skills. And that's, I think, interesting, because you understand that this is a priority that we consider important. So here, there is maybe some gap. And then competitiveness, business, SME development, trade and investment. Just to notice, and that's my last remark on the priority number 7, governance, you see that this is a cross-cutting priority selected by all. So it's really to say that, and that we agree with DG REGIO, we want to put more emphasis on local governance. We are really convinced that that's another way to, let's say, promote democracy, local democracy in the Western Balkans, especially. Next slide. Okay, so now we'll give the floor to Giuseppe, which will talk a bit about EUSAIR and USDR and the investment plan for Western Balkan. Giuseppe.
Thank you very much. Well, now we have this this term here that I guess you have already heard, the embedding process. This is something important in our view, because what is that about? I mean, you know it already, but it is a way to better use the budget we have at our disposal. It is also a way to move out from this convention that is still in the minds of someone that the macro-regional strategies should be financially supported only by the transnational program supporting it. So Adrian for the EUSAIR and the Danube program for the Danube macro-regional strategies. I think that in the last period we have explained it quite often, so it is clear that it is not like that. We have used this term mainly for the mainstream programs. So when talking about mainstream programs in the member state, for example, as you know, cooperation is an horizontal objective now of cohesion policy. So this is very important. But what is embedding? I mean, simply is to embed, to align the macro-regional priorities in the program priorities. This is something that has already happened in the past, in the current programming period. It is very clear, but for the new programming period, we are actually expecting a little bit more. And what we expect is coordination and cooperation among programs. This is something that was also requested by the Council. You know, the Council conclusion in December on the implementation of macro-regional strategies. There was really a request to continue work on the embedding process, to establish networks of managing authorities, and in general to make managing authorities cooperate around the priorities of macro-regional strategies. Of course, when we are in an area that is at the border between EU member states and IPA countries, and even farther, if you talk about the Danube strategy, you need to combine different systems and different funding programs. In our case, for Interreg programs, what we expect, and there is already an experience at least something was started in the framework of the EUSAIR to launch a cooperation among Interreg programs in the region. So all Interreg programs, as if I'm talking about the EUSAIR, I'm talking about the AGRI program, of course, the transnational program, and CBC programs in the region. So both IPA CBC and CBC in the member states like Italy, Slovenia, or Italy, Croatia, etc. So what we are expecting is really that there is more cooperation among you. Of course, there are no percentages as in the case of the transnational programs, where there should be a concentration of 80% of the budget on the priorities of the macro-regional strategies. And of course, when we talk about cross-border cooperation programs, there are some local projects that continue to be important, but at the same time, if you take some of the priorities, and in particular, as I was looking also at the previous slide, which is for IPA programs, but I'm sure that you have a very similar situation for Interreg programs or CBC programs in the region, where most of the programs have selected in the current programming period, and even more in the future, topics like climate change reaction, or protection of the environment, biodiversity, etc., which require some cooperation. Of course, cannot be limited to a single small border area. So in that case, for sure, there is a large scope for coordination and cooperation in line with, if you go to the next slide, thank you, Betiana. In line with the priorities of the macro-regional strategies, and in line with those that we call in the EUSAIR the flagships, and in the Danube region the strategic topics. On the top of that, cooperating, we think that if we manage to do this through already in the planning phase, in the programming phase, to start devising some calls together, for example, to make projects, to cooperate, to have coordinated projects. I think that's a way to maximize the impact of projects on the territory, and of course to being in line. I mean, we have this very interesting work that has been promoted by the Slovenian presidency of the EUSAIR, both for the EUSAIR and the USDR, on how the flagships, which are, let's say, the main priorities of the EUSAIR, could contribute to the economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans, and we have the same exercise for the USDR. So if you, with your projects, you manage to contribute to those flagships or strategic projects, of course you will indirectly, but maybe also directly, contribute to the implementation of some of the again, I mean, we have the same wording here, flagships of the economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans, which it's let's say that the main and most important document for this programming period on financing strategic initiatives in the Western Balkans. So it's a very important contribution to development in that region, and also to the enlargement process. Thank you. I give the floor back to Gilles.
Thank you, Giuseppe. So I'm back with you. Okay, as you understand from, so Giuseppe has already conveyed to you that it's important that you duly consider the two strategies, and you try to align to the extent you can with their priorities. And that's also obviously a good platform for better coordination among you, but also, and that's something that we already, let's say, presented to you in the first session, better coordination with the other EU programs. And we think that the benefits will be for all, for them, for the other EU funds, but also for us, clearly. You see here, intentionally, I use this picture where you see it's an Interreg project, but you see, when you see the picture, you could believe that this is DG AGRI, big project. So it's to see also that there are more and more interlinks among us, and that's normal. The general objectives are the same for all, and the Green Deal, you see, actually is really almost deserve a 360 degrees approach. Next slide, Bessiana. Thank you. So you see here we have tried to list, let's say, the important funds that you might, let's say, encounter in your surround, depending obviously in the sectors, the policy objectives that you have chosen. Interreg IPA, you see, is at the top, and then you have in the first row, let's say, essentially, I would call them the research investment funds, then the ESIF ones, but also the IPA 3. But you have also the EU for Health funds. You have, so you see there is a lot, and that's also why we felt the need to make the presentation today, because we understand even for us, sometimes it's not easy to get the overall picture on, let's say, all the stakeholders in the region. There are also, you see, we mentioned also the just transition mechanism and the recovery and resilience facility. This is obviously essentially valid for the member states, but DG NEAR has in mind something similar for the Western Balkans. Why we think that this coordination will be more possible in the near future than it was, because actually the rules are much more compatible, the new rules. Also, the strategic priorities are much more aligned. So therefore, we are really convinced that you can work much more in complementarity with the other funds. Next slide, please, Bessiana. Yeah, so those this reinforced cooperation, obviously, it can take place at different levels, and it includes us. So we perfectly acknowledge that we have also to make, and we are making, I think, the efforts to coordinate better among us, among Commission services, but also at your level, first during the programming process, and then later when you implement your programs. And that's why, but you will see that later in the presentation, that's why we think this partnership principle is so important, and you need really to put in place good coordination mechanisms to be sure that you have a regular contact with your pair, let's say, on this. Next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so now we'll give the floor to Bernhard. I assume he's now with us. So DG RTD, Bernhard, are you with us?
Thanks a lot. Yes, I managed to join you. It was a bit of a journey, and I was just coming out of another meeting. Sorry for wasn't being able to join you earlier. And as Gilles has said, yes, we are more compatible now, and we can cooperate easier within the different services. And actually, we realized that, let's say, early last year. And with the support of our hierarchy, we managed to get this so-called Western Balkan agenda. And then the title actually continues much longer on innovation and all good other things. But this now is a very nice framework that helps us to interact with each other from the side of the Commission, but also to interact with the member states and the Western Balkan stakeholders. So we also have steering platforms and so on. Can we go to the next slide, please? The breakthrough that we got actually in this cooperation was that DG NEAR recognized it. I mean, they have done a huge exercise last year in reaching out to the Western Balkans. But the most important thing is the economic and investment plan that was already mentioned just before. And there, the Western Balkan agenda is one of the key elements in delivering its innovation component. So that is sort of something where, yes, DG Research and Innovation, of course, it's one of our main deliverables, if you want, with the Horizon Europe program, if you can go to the next slide, where also sort of the Western Balkan is fully included, and all of them are supposed to be fully associated later this year with retroactive applicability from beginning of the year. So there will be no a gap in access that they can sort of help funding and gain cooperation opportunities with other partners in the framework program. Now, of course, we also want to sort of fight the brain drain, have an economic or support an economic recovery process in the region, digital and green transformations, of course, Commission priorities that we fully support. And the good thing again is, like Gilles was saying, we can do this from different angles. And in the past, one would have said, ooh, double funding, the same thing, we should never touch that. Actually, we are now really complementing each other. And I think this is the difference, that we are coordinated and we really can say green and digital. You get that from us. You can get this from the colleagues in DG AGRI, DG GROW, Enterprise Europe Network, and so on. So that is, I think, the big difference that has happened. And if we go to the next slide, please. So we have 3 different elements on this agenda. You can read it. It has some 20 pages of, well, somebody calls it also a Christmas tree of good intentions. But again, the thing is, it's a framework. And we worked it out with member states and with Western Balkan partners. And there we also sort of, actually we meet monthly to discuss on how to implement it. And then we have a table that really lists every quarter what are the actions that we're going to prioritize and how we're going to implement them. And the other thing is, as I said, it's a framework. It's not legally binding and it doesn't have any extra cash attached to it. So all what we do is something that we, with resources that we have available already now. I'll come to it if we come to the next slide, please. So you can see that over the past 15 something years, 2 framework programs on research and innovation, that the Western Balkans have nicely progressed, doubled, tripled the money they gain, more than doubled the number of participants. So they are getting nicely integrated in what we call the European research area. And for the last 7 years so far, they got about 160 million euros competitively. Nobody is giving them the money for free. They have to compete, and their proposals are amongst the very best ones, and that's why they get this money. You also see the colleagues from DG ERG, how many mobility projects they have, 17,000 people, young people in mobility programs, 48,000 students and university staff moving. So this is really showing that, yes, geographically they're in the heart of Europe, but also when it comes to research and innovation, education, if you want the knowledge triangle, also colleagues from the Joint Research Center helping in smart specialization strategy efforts, in technology transfer exercises. So this nicely ties together. Next slide, please. So what we offer for the future, and I said this is money that we have in the pocket, is still calls for proposals this year, where the Western Balkans is fully eligible to the so-called widening element, if you want, it's the fourth or horizontal pillar of the structure of Horizon Europe, a little bit similar to the Gilles diagram just before. And there we have a specific call, and that is very rare because we don't do geographic prioritizations in Horizon Europe. The guiding principle is just scientific excellence. And only the best ones, as I said, qualify and can get the money available. So we have success rates in the order of 12%. So only 1 out of 8, 9, 10 proposals being successful. So it really needs an effort to really create this consortia, invest in preparing proposals and to bid. And therefore we ring fence some money for the Western Balkans, particularly this year, 21 million plus a policy support measure of 5 million. And next year we have a general widening call, which sort of helps the EU member states plus associated countries that are lagging a little bit behind in their research and innovation performance. And there we will have 160 million, where again the Western Balkans can fully participate. But first, the 21 million are really for them, so that we really move the things. And we'll come later to the priority areas. Next slide, please. Because you can read this afterwards, of course, it's more as a background information. Here, just want to raise that, okay, we integrate them, we work with them, innovation, national innovation efforts, but we do this in a kind of partnership way in this steering platform that has been created 2006 already. So we are celebrating our 15th year now. And in the past, we were meeting maybe 2-3 times a year. With the Corona pandemic, we moved, of course, to online meetings, and now we do this monthly. So half a day meeting every month, and this really put us all together. Member states, Western Balkans, we can discuss, usually in these 2.5 hours, we have 2 major topics and a few smaller ones, keynote presentations, follow-ups, monitoring how things are going. And also there we realized how much the member states are engaged, sort of member states agencies are active in the Western Balkans in helping innovation, in sort of moving things, sharing best practice. We discussed, for example, with the AGRI colleagues, for example, that Spain, which, yes, producing a lot of agricultural and food products, but has quite some geographic similarities with the Balkans. And the Spanish colleagues are extremely active in the Balkans. And we also see some kind of exchange of personnel between the two. So that could help in moving forward. Next slide, please. This is next slide. Yes, this is, you can study at your own ease, but you see in which areas, in which years the Western Balkans are active. Most interestingly, about 100 to 120 participants per year we have in the program, and about 60 projects, and you see how the money is going up, and the 2020 figures are yet not complete. We will get another 30 to 40% increase still. Next one, and I think that is the main slide that I wanted to sort of discuss with you, because here you see the thematic areas where the Balkan is strongest. So in ICT, in energy, and in some extent in health as well. Food is a little bit lower, it's only around 10 million. Spreading excellence is this call that I said was widening and these elements. So they are quite subdivided. So that is a big column, but it consists of many smaller elements. So that has to be broken down further. So that I would disregard in this analysis. But you also see that the environment is not so bad. And of course, Marie Skłodowska co-reactions, they're always strong as well. But on the ICT side, giving example, for example, Kosovo, where I sort of visited innovation technology centers, they work with Israelis, they work with Finnish. When we talk, for example, with the European Space Agency's startup center in Graz, that is coaching about 240 SMEs in the Western Balkans, they were telling us money is not an issue. There's enough venture capital. They want us to guide venture capitalists on which of the initiatives are the most fruitful, the most prospective ones, or that also have government support. So it doesn't really need money from our side to really instigate things, to move things. They have the national innovation schemes that could be a first round of filtering, and the ones who are then successful, we can move on to the next layer. And there we then would have enough international venture capitalists waiting that are ready to invest. We are talking with EIB, EBRD, the big banks. They are ready to have loans, guarantees in the context of the European Innovation Council. So the tools and the means are all there. It's for us more to facilitate and make things happen. And that's why the discussions also today are quite useful and great, because we can then, I wouldn't say attack, but at least address subject of common interest, being it clean air, as I said, digital green aspects of transformation of energy. We are discussing nearshoring of production. For example, Albania is a country that has 100% green energy, electricity, because the oil power plant they have, they don't use actually. So from that point of view, there are intrinsic benefits in the region that we can easily, I would say exploit is even the wrong thing, that we can sort of help to expand, and discussions on the ICT area to include them better in sort of data storage and archiving systems that you need, yes, for research purposes, but you might also need for, we're talking pandemics, what about databases on COVID related aspects that governments might want to share. So infrastructure related aspects that we will need anyway, that go cross-border, that also pervade into the member states, and we're back then into the macro-regional aspects of this. And how can we sort of facilitate that? If you take forest fires, sort of climate change, flash floods, you would need some kind of, let's say, Adriatic coast monitoring system that needs computing resources. that one could easily see maybe installed on the Italian side, but providing the service to the other side of the Adriatic Sea. So we have these sort of possibilities that have been identified as something that the governments in the region are looking for. And if we just then can help with guiding them to the right procurement procedures, maybe facilitating a few studies to find out what are sort of the context of what is still needed to advance some of these initiatives to make them ready to sort of fly, then yes, we can help. And as I said, there's this extra 5 million euro that will come early next year in policy support measures. So we have a little bit of pocket money also to facilitate. And we also publish in September a foresight exercise for the Western Balkans that is delivering fantastic results, how they see themselves in the year 2035, sort of what are the big changes and what would then be needed, or sort of the question is then put back after the scenarios have been defined and discussing now with the governments before we publish the final results. If these scenarios are there, what does it impact on, in our case, research and innovation policy making? And one of the aspects was, one of the scenarios is a Chinese one, what we call it Chinese, sort of a foreign powers having much more influence than they already have now, a pure European scenario, and one being a business-driven sort of U-turn wherever the most business opportunities are. And then the question was, okay, let's look at green aspects, environmental aspects. In which of the three scenarios, these environmental aspects are most respected? And all of them think that practically only the European scenario gives them a good green environment. So we see that there also on their side is a lot of positive thinking when it comes in cooperating with us. And if we can, through this Western Balkan agenda and sort of aligning and sort of working together, if we can boost these positive aspects, it will definitely help them on, as we always have to call their path towards Europe. So that's fine. Thanks a lot, and I'm happy to follow up any further discussions, or then later on go in detail, provide you numbers, reports, whatever might be needed.
Thank you, Bernhard. Thank you very much. Maybe we can move to Marius, if you are with us, so DG AGRI. Also to give, you see, another insight from a colleague to show you that really we have, at least from our side, the willingness to coordinate better. And we hope that can be then replicated at your level. Marius?
Of course. Thank you, Gilles. Hello, colleagues, and thanks for inviting us to this meeting as well. I'm from DG AGRI, from unit dealing with pre-accession assistance in agriculture and rural development. Gilles, could I share my slides, the few slides that I prepared?
Yeah, Bessiana, could you share the slides of Marius rather than mine?
If you could do it for me, then I would appreciate it. Just to structure a bit more my presentation. And while you're doing this, speaking about complementarity, so Gilles has mentioned it several times, Bernhard confirmed. And just to confirm also from my side that we all work very well together. We know each other and we know each other's work. And just for those who don't maybe know Gilles' background, I think he is the best placed to speak about complementarities, at least when it comes to your area of work and DG AGRI's area of work, because he used to be in DG AGRI for many years dealing with pre-accession assistance. So Gilles very well knows both sides of the table, at least when it comes to our work under EPA. Now, under EPA, what are we? We are EPA Rural Development Programs, and we always, in brief, refer to ourselves as EPART. And when we talk to everybody who knows us a little bit less, we say, you know, €1 of EPART, in fact, contributes to multiple objectives. So firstly, what we do, and I guess that is the most important task, or raison d'etre for EPART, is alignment with EU standards. So we're trying to help countries to transform their agricultural sectors and to make them more competitive and to allow them to export into the EU single market by aligning these sectors with EU standards. By this, we also create sort of level playing field, both for the producers of the Western Balkans and Turkish countries and EU producers. Now, the second very important aspect is that while providing support, we also contribute, we do believe we contribute to the food security in these countries. So we help the countries, we help the governments, public sector to ensure that there's a good quality food and there's sufficient food for the Western Balkans citizens. And, you know, self-sufficiency in food production is not always the case in all countries. I think currently only Serbia is sufficient in food and exports more than it imports. So there's still a lot to do to transform agricultural sectors in the Western Balkans and Turkey. And equally at the same time, with our program, we do contribute to prosperity in rural areas. And this third very important pillar is public administration reform and application of good governance principles in the sector, because we don't simply give out the money, just like you do not give out the money. We have to make sure that the managing authorities and paying agencies adhere to certain principles of good governance, and to build up the structures takes a long time. So we believe that this is another important objective that we're trying to pursue. If we go to the next slide. So very briefly, what is EPA? So you already very well know EPA, Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance. We're in this context. Our budget is about 10% of EPA. And a difference is that this budget is managed by DG AGRI, just like a CBC budget is managed by colleagues in DG REGIO by Gilles and his unit. All pre-accession countries are eligible, but currently, in fact, we have 5 EPA programs. So Turkey and the 4 Western Balkan countries, for different reasons, Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina do not have EPA yet. We have multi-annual programs, so 7-year programs, just like more or less with the member states. For those who are more familiar, these programs are implemented around 11 measures, and now we added 2 new ones under EPART 3, so this is why I have 13 in the brackets. I'll get to this in a second. Within each of these measures, then countries have different calls, and they have sectors and subsectors, so they can target well their beneficiaries. And we also have eligibility criteria and selection criteria and upper and lower thresholds. So we go to the really detail of the policy intervention, policy making. If we could move to the next slide. So this is one before last slide. This table is quite informative because firstly, it shows you measures, but this is not all measures. In the next slide, I'll show you the remaining measures. However, these measures in the table are the ones which are most commonly implemented under EPART. So by default, all countries always choose measure 1, which is investments in physical assets and agricultural holdings, and measure 3, which is investments in food processing. So by default, always all the countries go for these measures as the first ones. Another important measure is farm diversification and business development. And I think this is where we could see many complementarities with the CBC programs. And then we have technical assistance measure, and the objective of this measure is to help implementation of the programs. So of course, it is in the interest of all countries to have this measure entrusted. And just to mention, I forgot to say that the modality of implementation is indirect management. So it's different from, the approach is very similar to the member states, but the implementation modality is slightly different. If we could go to the next slide. Yes, so just the remaining measures are support for setting up producer groups, improvement of skills and competitiveness. So in a way, these are sort of soft measures, improvement, support for advisory services. And then we added 2 new measures, which we're currently developing, innovation and knowledge transfer. So we're designing this measure with the help of Bernhard as well, and the measure on financial instruments. And since the amounts of support are not really so big under our programs, we believe that if any of the countries choose this measure on financial instruments, it could be complementary of what already exists in the region. So existing guarantee schemes or loan schemes. So this is very briefly an overview of what we do, and I think I leave it up to you to judge whether your work could be complementary with ours and vice versa, but I really believe so. And of course, we always, as I mentioned at the beginning, we do work very well with colleagues in DG REGIO and other DGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Marius. Thank you very much. Bessena, can we return to the main presentation? And so you understand that indeed we support, let's say, more cooperation with RTD, AGRI, other funds. There are other EU funds as well, but those are important ones. You understand that they have a real ambition for the Western Balkans. Also, Marius mentioned Turkey, but in Turkey, you know that actually we have only one program between Bulgaria and Turkey for the time being. Although it's only a few measures, as Marius highlighted for EPART, that we consider compatible in a way with the CBC objectives, but there are nonetheless areas where we think that there might be more complementarities among us. You will see in the next slide also some examples, practical example, where we see we can have actually complementarities with for instance, EPART or with RTD. Now, before that, I will say a few words about the border obstacles. You know that this is actually one of the main goals of the internal Interreg programs. And to be clear with you, we have actually decided, it's obviously something decided at the highest level in DG REGIO, but actually to start the work for the Interreg IPA programs, to analyze in more details the border obstacles between the member states and the IPA countries, because we are convinced that we can already move forward to a certain extent, obviously, certainly not as within the member states, now, especially considering that the single market is something, or the Schengen area are elements that we don't benefit, but nonetheless nonetheless there are things that we can do certainly much better, and your programs could help. So next slide, please. Now you need to then push several times, because I will immediately show straight the old drawing, because thank you, Bessiana. So you probably know that our colleagues of D2, our sister unit, they carry out a review in 2015, and out of which they define a certain an action plan with a number of solutions that they call B solutions. So we have the ambition to do something similar for the internal, the IPA, Interreg IPA, let's say borders, if I can call them like this. So right now we have actually a team of consultants working on the issue, and we hope to get the let's say results by the end of the summer. We will certainly convey you to a meeting to share with you the main conclusions of their work. But you understand that obviously in the context of your programming work, it's important that you know already now. So it is certainly an aspect that you can consider when you are deciding about the specific objectives you want to finance in your respective programs. Next slide. Okay, so through ISO 1, there are actually new focuses, let's say. First, that's actually the ones I've just mentioned, the legal and administrative cooperation, that can be improved. You see here are a few example possible actions that you could perform, and where you have typically good cross-border projects. That's clear. You see, the last one is probably important to mention is cross-border interaction and data. Clearly, right now, we don't have many, and this is something on which we are working. We are working not only with this consultant, but we hope that also some interregional programs can help us to develop such a data, and we think that can or could also help you in your programming choices. But unfortunately, let's say for the drafting of your program right now, I'm afraid it will be too late. So, but in the let's say the course of the implementation, maybe for the next generation, we hope that we will have many more data to use to make our programming choices. Next slide. Okay, so and now another thing that you can finance through ISO 1 is the people-to-people project. So you see, I told you people project are not equivalent to small projects, but we are convinced that people-to-people can really actually, let's say, have a significant effect with or high impact with a small budget. Also, it's really about reconciliation, about trust. That's also something we are discussing with our colleagues of DG NEAR for the IPA CBC programs. We are, this is those people-to-people projects, in our view, are really one of is in the DNA, let's say, of our cooperation program. So we really encourage you to finance such projects. And obviously they are targeting typically cultural events, youth events, sport events, which are, again, you see, very much also in line with objectives like youth, which is a priority for us. Culture is also something very much hit now by the crisis. So again, there are, let's say, different arguments to really keep some part of your budget for such projects. Next slide, please. Thank you. The other thing that you can finance through ISO 1, I would say essentially, obviously, the transnational programs, is the governance of the macro-regional strategies, or the strategies. We have here listed a number of possible actions. So obviously, that is something important, but essentially for the transnational program supporting strategies. Next slide, please. Thank you. And that's actually something new and quite specific to us and to the next program, is the last action that you can support through ISO 1 is support to democracy and civil society. So this is really new, but this is an area where we are, let's say, we count on you in a way to actually promote reforming processes and maybe not democratic transition, that might be a bit, that's more true for the next program, but at least reforming processes in the IPA countries. And we have put on the slide, you see, this is also very much consistent with the main objectives of the IPA 3 programming framework. So you see this idea that we have to promote governance at the local level. This is a very strategic, let's say, objective of IPA 3. Next slide. Thank you. About ISO 2, so next slide. Yeah, so just to tell you that we are convinced, you see this is a quotation of our president, von der Leyen, that actually peace, security, and development are mutually dependent. Peace is very much, in our view, at least in the region, very much linked to the questions of trust and reconciliation. Development is more about sustainable growth, now greening, obviously, but security remains nonetheless something also important to consider. Certainly not, we don't expect from you to finance huge security projects. Anyway, there is a cap. You know that the regulation has put a limit, a 5% cap. So the ambitions are nonetheless limited. But at the same time, security is important, and we know that some programs have made a choice to implement ISO 2, and we encourage actually you to consider it. It's certainly something important. And we have, for instance, also discussion with DG Home. So that's actually the line DG implementing all those security, internal security, border management, visa matters. And they're convinced that we can also complement very well what they are doing. So it's to say, again, they were not mentioned too much today in our presentation, but nonetheless, it's just to emphasize that with them as well, we think that we can have very positive complementarities. Thanks to your program, obviously. Okay, so what are now the critical success factors to put into motion all the things that we have presented to you today? First, and that was already mentioned in the first session, we are convinced that the partnership principle, but also the principle of transparency, are extremely important. So that's really something on which we will pay more attention now. You know, this is something which is promoted at the highest level in DG REGIO, not only for the Interreg program, but for all programs that DG REGIO is implementing. I think DG Employment has absolutely the same. I show you, you see with the slide from DG Mare that the DG Mare has also. So it's to say that I think in this question of partnership, and Bernhard also mentioned it, this partnership principle is really something at the core, let's say, of this period. The role of the social partners and civil society organization is also very important. You know, networking, creating networks, that's obviously also the essence of your programs. Building trust, building bridges. Probably the crisis has also created sometimes distances among us. So obviously we count on you in this period to, let's say, restore or to reconnect the different communities. And also, especially in the Western Balkans, the policy solutions are very often across regional borders. So that's also something which is important. So that's why also we pay a lot of attention to the two transnational programs supporting the two strategies, because they have also an important role to play, we think, in the new architecture of Interreg IPA programs. For the needs, you see, what we would recommend in general, a more bottom-up cooperation, a more extensive and regular cooperation with us and with the colleagues that you have met today, but also with the delegation. That's another thing on which we want to insist, that we think that the delegation, because, you know, our delegation are implementing for some, at least for some of them, the IPA CBC programs in the Western Balkans, but also they have obviously a very good knowledge of the IPA mainstream programs and the investment plan for the Western Balkans. So we will kindly ask you to keep them more in the loop in the future. And we will certainly, you can do it through us, but we hope that our colleagues in delegation can actually have an increasing role in the coming committees. Cross-sectoral and cross-territorial coordination as well. That's something that we need. So really to get this the overall picture and to avoid fragmentation, as it is still too often the case nowadays. Leveraging, that was mentioned by Bernhard. So it's also to say that sometimes the resources actually are not the issue. And again, we know that some of your programs have been now seriously reduced, but then leveraging can be a solution to counterbalance, let's say, this. And also, and that was mentioned, the coordinated action that we promote, they should also reduce bureaucratic obstacles for your potential applicants. That's also important that we pass the message to everyone that really those simplifications, they are designed primarily for the potential applicants. That's really for the citizens, for the people who want to apply for your programs. Next slide. Thank you. So the coordination mechanism at different levels, what we mean by that, but that actually the coordination that we are promoting very much today, it can, of course, already take place now during your programming process, either with the other EU funds, but also with your national funds, clearly, but also through during the implementation. That's also important to say. And again, with the same, with the EU funds that we have mentioned, or with the national funds. And you see there are different possibilities, but I assume that you know already, like the coordinated calls or joint calls. You can also organize sequences of calls. We can also play on the selection criteria. So there are different mechanisms, let's say, that we can think about, which can really help to coordinate better among us. And then that's the last, at least main level that we would see is you can have also coordination at project level. So beneficiaries can also organize this coordination. Obviously, we don't want to see double funding, but coordination should actually help us to avoid that. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so next again. So first example that we want to use today, we are almost at the end, is Prespa, EU for Prespa. So it's for only a few colleagues. So you see we are at the border between the Republic of North Macedonia, Albania, and Greece. And actually, you have actually here we see a possible combined operation between IPA 3, mainstream program, we call it like this, IPARD, and us. So Interreg IPA program. So here we have listed, you see, a number of type of operation which could complement each other, and then we can agree how we, let's say, finance them or coordinate, even in lots for some of them. We could imagine how the different funds finance them. So you see, obviously, this requires a strategic, in a way, approach, some preparation, but this is very well possible, and that can really give a very unique visibility on our actions. Knowing also that Prespa is a very symbolic location. So that would be, you see, for the territorial focus. Now we'll move to another example that we have taken, which is more on thematic. So we've taken health. You know that obviously cross-border healthcare cooperation has been very much at stake during the crisis, even between member states. But we think that nonetheless, we need to take lessons for that, and we need to improve. And although the IPA countries obviously have bigger differences with us than other member states among them, there are nonetheless actually a lot of common things that we could do together. I know that already some programs actually are quite active in the health care cooperation. So here are actually the main, let's say, legal sources that you need to consider. There are also a lot in reality of guidance documents, platform that you can use, that is listed in the gray box, that you can use also if you want to program something on healthcare cooperation. And you see also, and that's another thing, that we have different EU funds also active in the area. They are mentioned in the blue box, like us, Interreg, but also Horizon right now, because that's still the current period, Horizon 2020, but that will be Horizon Europe soon, e-health. So again, you see, either thematic or territorial, there is really a, let's say, a possibility, and even I think an interest for all of us to work much more together. Next slide. Thank you. Next, yeah. So just about healthcare, you see now the actually current. So it's the period even between 2007-2017. The statistics are provided by DG Santé, our DG Santé. So UK is still there, as you can notice. And you see there are a certain number of projects, but it would be nice if you see in the near future, we see also some new projects in the Western Balkan or Southeast Europe. That would be certainly, I think, a good achievement of our programs. And you see there are different types of focus for those projects. Sorry, so on emergencies, capital investment, knowledge sharing. So there are different ways to organize that. Now, sorry, next slide. You were right. Thank you, Bessiana. So you see there's, as I said, a lot of information that you can use if you are interested to develop, let's say, this policy, to choose this policy objective, PO4. And we see, unfortunately, that the crisis may be not yet completely behind us, and therefore cross-border healthcare is maybe something that we need to develop in any event. You see, although the situation is improving, fortunately. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so we are now approaching the conclusions. So yes, next slide. Bessina, thank you. So what you see we want to convey to you today is, with the 3 sessions we presented to you, is to say, with this more strategic approach, which is first based on a better complementarity with the other funds, second, which is more oriented to the EU enlargement agenda, and third, which is using at the maximum the novelties of the Interreg regulation, essentially, we consider that you can have a bigger impact. You can have bigger projects, bigger project pipeline as well, and therefore absorb, because that's also sometimes, although I know that for some of them, in general, the funds are contracted or in 1 or 2 calls, but nonetheless, better, higher visibility. That's obviously very important. And also better links to policymakers. So not, you see, working in isolation for the macro region, because we consider, as you understand, also something very important, that your work can also help them, and this more strategic approach can to help their development. It can also, as we Giuseppe explained very well, it can also strengthen a more horizontal EU accession process for the Western Balkans. Can also, the macro region would then benefit from the experience, from your experience, which is also, and we try in that respect to establish also networks of managing authorities. That's very important. And that provides, obviously, we have to be completely transparent with you, some funds. The fact that you, let's say, support this embedding process is obviously a way to fund the priorities of the macro regions. Next slide. So they also benefit, and that's probably not the least, for the potential applicants. As we show you, there is an alignment of the requirements among all of our different funds, which I think that's really extremely positive. There is also, but this, let's say, coordinated work could also increase the visibility of our actions. And also we count on you to actually give an access to all the innovations that the regulation provides, like the financial instruments, the joint territorial instruments, or small project fund, but there are other things. But it's just to say, for potential applicants also, we think this more strategic approach can be really positive. It can also allow some maybe applicants which were not so, let's say, interested so far, because they may be considered the program too slow or too bureaucratic, to be more interested and then to attract to us new type of projects. So we think really this more strategic approach is really in the interest of all. Next slide. So to conclude, because we are very at the very end, before I show you the timeline, because that's to address a question. So we think that through the different actions that I've shown, all the benefits that we think this strategic approach can create, we can create more complex, we call them ecosystems, policy interactions, synergies. Also, you need to notice we talk about positive overlapping. So you see that overlapping for us are not anymore always negative. We can have also positive overlapping among us if they are coordinated. Okay. And also additionality to the mainstream program, because obviously that's also important. That was mentioned by the European Court of Auditors. The purpose of your program is certainly not to duplicate or finance projects that could be financed by the mainstream programs. That's obviously not at all what we wish. Next slide. Thank you. So also to tell you that purposely when we design, let's say, this new period, also when we drafted our orientation papers, we really tried to achieve a good balance between continuity and innovation, innovative elements. There is also, we think, genuine simplifications, as we say to you. So there are also a new element on thematic concentration in small project. I hope that we emphasize what was the most important. Otherwise, do not hesitate to raise question to us. So as I say to you already, but that's very, very important. You should not operate in isolation. So we really try to establish an ecosystem actually. And then indeed, that was already said, but we seek better coordination and complementarities. So the expected benefits, but we will see that during the next evaluations. We hope to get more ambitious projects, new partners, because that's also important that we renew. Let's say we don't always finance the same usual suspects. Good projects, good project pipeline, and we increase also our visibility, especially in the region. Next slide. So the time frame now. So first about IPA, and because there was this question about the IPA financing agreement. You see that's the part in orange red, I would say. So we are working on it, and we hope to be able to share it with you in the beginning of next year, maybe already still at the end of this year. So that's where we consider. Now we'll read this graph with you. So we still hope that our regulation will be adopted by the end of June, but you will see afterwards, you see the exact milestone for our regulations. For the IPA 3 regulation might take a bit longer, but still we hope that this IPA 3 regulation will be adopted by September. For the adoption of the implementing acts on geography and program budgets, so the two implementing act, 2 out of the 4 that I mentioned, also as well, September. And then for the implementing act on IPA 3 programming framework, you know, we are dependent on the adoption of the IPA 3 regulation. That's why we put October 2021. Then you will have 2 agreements that we need, on which we are working now, that for which we are developing templates. So first, the IPA 3 Financial Framework Partnership Agreement. So that's the new name for the framework agreement. So that's a document that DG is using for all their funds. It's essentially for them. They are really minor things for us, for the Interreg IPA programs. And then the Interreg IPA financing agreements. As I told you already, there are still, for the time being, let's say, discussion among us to see what we keep in the financial framework partnership agreement and what we put in the Interreg IPA financing agreement. Maybe a simplification could be to actually move almost all provisions to the Interreg IPA financing agreement. Thanks to that, you would have one unique source, let's say, of provision instead of let's say being obliged to combine systematically the two agreements to get the overall picture. But that is still in development, let's say, under development. Then the tool, I think, are the submission of your draft program. So we have already received some, at least informally. You know that we have to wait that SFC is officially launched, the new SFC, before you can formally submit your draft. We nonetheless encourage you to send your draft as soon as possible, because also you can understand that if we wait too much, then there will be, let's say, they will collide with the programs, the other programs that DG REGIO asked to assess, mainstream programs, next other Interreg programs. So really, I encourage you to accelerate if you are still, let's say, busy with the drafting. And for the adoption, you see that we foresee an adoption because we depend obviously on the legal basis. So I say, but that's quite conservative, an adoption of the first program in March 2022. We hope maybe earlier, but it depends also a bit on you and on the adoption of the different regulation, and that is something which is a bit out of our control. Next slide. Thank you, Bessiana. Yeah, so about the cohesion package, so you see the different regulation we are dealing with. So you see, the landing time is normally June, the end of June, for the publication in the official journal, for the CPR, for the RDF, and also for the Interreg regulations. We are still on, so far this is still the calendar we have. And this is obviously important for the previous table, because this might postpone a bit everything, but still we are optimistic at this stage. So I would like to thank you. I think we have now reached the end. Thank you very much for your attention.